Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here, playing around a little bit with my Sleepy Vlogs. This is Sleepy Vlog number 78.1. My plan at the moment is to do a three-part Sleepy Vlog because I took a shot at what I planned to do, and after 50 minutes realized I was going on too long. So now I'm going to try again in 20-minute increments, I hope. So I apologize if this ends up more than 20 minutes, but that's my attempt. So in each portion, I will show you a bit of some recent haul stuff, and talk about that. And then also tackle comments and questions that came in on the last Sleepy Vlog. So yeah, we'll see how this works out. So let me start with some stuff I found in various ways the past week or so. Right by my daughter's school, and since I've left my job, I've been taking her to school and picking her up from school a lot. Right by the house, right by the school, is this used bookstore that was in this cool kind of triangular building, and this guy who seemed like kind of an old hippie ran it. And I used to, in the pre-child days, I'd wander in there every once in a while and buy a paperback book or two. And I always meant to really dig deep into it and explore some more. Unfortunately, that fellow died last year, and for a few months, his son or nephew or some relative tried running the store, and now they've apparently given up. I don't think he ever made much money off of it. Stores like that, they're pretty much gone, at least from this part of town. So it was the last one of its sort. And anyway, as they were moving out, they threw some total junk books in boxes and just left them on the sidewalk. And as I arrived early one day to school to pick up my daughter, I just peered in the box and thought, God, what junk. I mean, this is just totally trashed. Why would anyone even want these? And then I noticed one of the totally trashed books was Fantasy and Science, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, but its cover was missing. But I didn't recognize the cover or anything. I thought it was kind of old. It turns out this is actually from the 70s. I don't know why the covers have completely fallen off, but I grabbed a big stack of them out of this box, figuring no one else in the world wants these. I don't know how long I'll keep them in such bad condition, but I might look through them and find some stories that are interesting to me the usual thing when I have time to read. So, and some of the covers are kind of fun to look at, even though they're all fallen off. I don't know if they actually ripped off, or maybe they weren't glued well and they were kept in a hot attic or something. I don't know what happened to these books. Obviously, at one point, the owner of the store bought them and thought he would sell them. Ironically, I used to go in the store searching for old science fiction magazines, and he didn't have very many. I think I bought a copy of Analog once there, like one of the old ones that were oversized from during the period when Dune came out. I have the original analogs that have the first appearance of Dune in them. So I noticed several with this goofy alien in it. I assume he's not actually from the stories. The Silent Eyes of Time by Algis Budrys. Algis Budrys was once considered the great savior of science fiction. He was the hot, young, rebellious writer in the late 50s, I believe. Later on, I met Algis, and things did not work out that way, and he became more of an editor, and he ran the Writers of the Future contest. This one, this has a cover. So absolutely none of them have their covers remaining, and most do not have their back covers remain, even just lying around. But The Pale Brown Thing by Fritz Leiber, who is one of the kind of maybe co-inventors of Sword and Sorcery along with Robert E. Howard. He's the one who coined the name Sword and Sorcery. It was his Fafford and Grey Mouser stories that he did in, I think, the late 40s and 50s and 60s. Obviously, Conan and then later Elric of Melnibone became much more well-known Sword and Sorcery characters. The title author on this cover I've never heard of. I wonder what happened to Gerald Pierce. None of these people are that well-known anymore, anyway. This one seems to have no cover. A number of names that I don't know. Julian F. Grow and Hoke Norris and Zena Henderson. Zena Henderson I have heard of. Zena was one of those earlier female writers. I think got her start in the 40s or 50s. Pretty much forgotten now. There is a Dean R. Koontz story in here. I wonder if this is before he turned to horror. And Joanna Russ is the book editor, or the book reviewer, sorry. No real cover here. Here's the reoccurrence of that little alien. I don't really like this alien, but anyway. I guess he's now on the moon and riding around on a moon lander. This one's very interesting to me. I'm definitely going to try reading this. It says The Astura, a new novel by Jack Vance. I don't know if that means it's serialized or if it's just a short novel, a novella, which they're calling a new novel. There is no, I hope it's in here actually, there is no table of contents, so that means some pages are missing. Oh, and the first thing it opens to is a Michael Bishop story. He's a somewhat famous short story writer in science fiction. So, this one is missing also. I don't know if it's, yeah. This is kind of a cool cover. And most of the names on the cover are familiar to me, but not all of them. Some of them I think are pretty much forgotten. Yeah, so just an odd thing I picked up. Another oddity, last weekend, the family went to Powell's. Did we go on the weekend? No, we went on a weeknight. Maybe Monday night. We went to Powell's City of Books in downtown Portland, because there was a kid's book that my niece, who's now a college student going to college near us, mentioned to my daughter, and my daughter wanted to read it, and I guess it's out of print. We couldn't find it easily. So we went to Powell's City of Books. It's called The Children of the Lamp by Philip Kerr. At first, I just tried to download it on Kindle, but on Kindle, they've only got it starting with book number 4. They don't have the first 3 books in print, I guess, even on Kindle. So while we were there, I quickly went to the science fiction section because I wanted to collect more Perry Rodin books, but I couldn't find any. But in the section under R that I was looking were some Alex Raymond books. Alex Raymond being the famous Flash Gordon artist who died in the 50s, and these paperbacks are from 1974. So it looks like it was written by Alex Raymond. It says Alex Raymond's original story. And then if you look inside, it's by Con Stephenson. And I thought, wow, that name Con Stephenson does not sound like a real author's name. It sounds like the kind of pseudonym that people used to use back in the 40s. It always sounded a little odd, but it's somewhat European or something. And I also thought the cover maybe, I found 2 of them. I thought maybe the covers were by Gray Morrow, but on closer examination, they're by someone named George Wilson, who's an artist I never heard of, but I like his pulpy style, so I might try to research that. So I did look up Con Stevenson, and Con Stevenson was the pseudonym for 2 writers. One, a name well known to me, Ron Goulart, and another one named Bruce Cassidy, who was a pulp editor who frequently wrote under pseudonyms, but never, as far as I can tell, wrote under his own name. And Wikipedia says that Bruce Cassidy wrote this one, Flash Gordon and the Time Trap of Ming the Eighth. But then, if you go to the Ron Goulart Wikipedia entry, it says that Ron Goulart wrote both of these. So did Ron Goulart and Bruce Cassidy write this one together, or is there just a question of attribution? And look, I knew Ron Goulart was a person who wrote a lot of stuff, media tie-ins and things, and also was known for his humor writing, and also wrote a number of books about comics. So I was looking over his Wikipedia entry, and there are a number of comics-related books, and it points out that he he wrote a few scripts for Marvel Comics that were adaptations of science fiction short stories. And then he teamed up with Gil Kane on the Starhawks newspaper strip. Which brings me to another thing in my haul, which I completely forgot about. I think I got this from In Stock Trades about a month ago or 2 months ago because I saw it in a Library of Graphic Literature video. And that is the Starhawks volumes by Gil Kane that have been released by IDW. And I haven't even opened these yet. So it turns out, it says Archie Goodwin on here. It's funny, the Wikipedia entry says that Ron Goulart was one of the writers. Maybe he this is volume 2. Ron Goulart is credited. I assume these were plotted by Gil Kane and then he got assists from other writers. And this final volume, I can't see the cover. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting, and obviously working on Starhawks, which was a science fiction newspaper comic strip, dovetails nicely with working on the novelizations of one of the most famous, Flash Gordon, one of the most famous newspaper comic strips of all time, especially to us comic book superhero guys, because Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon art was a huge influence on most of the major comic book artists for decades, like John Buscema and so many others. John Buscema is the one that jumps to mind right away. But I think even people like Kubert and others. So let's see. So for some period of time, Gil Kane was doing this newspaper comic strip, and as a kid, I knew of its existence and never saw it. So this is one of those things of spending my adult money so that I can live out my childhood wishes to read this comic strip. I wonder if it's originally published in color. I think they were just those half-page Sunday strips, but it's presented in black and white here, so I don't know. I don't know if a color version exists. I'm happy to have these, and the Gil Kane art looks good in black and white. So, I keep saying so. Guess that's better than I'll probably say so. I'm going to get to some of the comments now before my 20 minutes runs out. Boy, I'm not going to get very far. So there was a huge huge bunch of people responding to the talk about the direct market, which someone had asked me, do I think the direct market should continue? And I said, yes, definitely. If I had my way, it would continue. I think it's very important to the evolution of the American comic book scene, and still is, in my opinion. So a lot of people left comments, and I'll just go through them in the order that I copy and pasted them onto my little notepad. Daniel Clark said, to go along with the last question regarding the direct market, do you feel we are near another speculator comics bubble bust? And that the famous one is in the, I guess, mid-90s or even early-ish 90s, when comics were selling enormous amounts to people who thought they were going to be incredibly collectible. It was also during the famous Image period. Back when Todd McFarlane sold 1 million Spider-Man, and then Jim Lee sold 8 million X-Men in one issue, and Rob Liefeld had similar numbers. And then when they went off to Image, they sold enormous numbers. And there were so many gimmicks and foil comics and everything. And there was a huge rush into comics of speculators who thought, because, comics from the 40s had made people rich, that comics from the 90s would make them rich. And when they all realized it wasn't going to happen, there was a huge crash. And 50 or 70% of comic book stores went out of business over a period of years, maybe 5 years or something. Following that boom was the bubble burst, and everybody went out of business. And somehow comics survived. Marvel Comics went bankrupt. And so, yeah, for a while, it probably looked like the end of comics. So he's saying, do you feel we're near another speculator comics bubble bust? I feel like Batman Damned is an example, meaning, so Batman Damned is now worth $100 on eBay, supposedly. So people are rushing out to get the few copies available because they're not going to reprint it with the personal junk of Batman showing. So I feel like Batman Damned is an example of how crazy things have gotten once again, where people are spending hundreds of dollars on one comic issue. I do not see people getting a return on these investments. With the microwave nature of the pop culture community, microwave nature, that's a great turn of phrase. With the microwave nature of the pop culture community, things hit big for a short while, then disappear within only a few weeks. The superhero comic book community is shrinking, plus physical media does not have the appeal it once did for many. With speculators all watching, reading the same info, you have these self-fulfilling prophecies where people are bidding against one another in hopes of capturing a book that will hit big years down the line. But who knows if the market will be there, or anyone will care if this image book was made into a Netflix series most people didn't know existed. So that's another example that when there's a rumor that some book is going to be made into a comic book series, speculators rush out and try to buy up as many copies as they can, with the idea that, like The Walking Dead, the number one issue of that comic will become kind of a key issue for other collectors. And, most new comics now become worth less than their cover price after a short period of time, kind of like cars off of as soon as they drive off the dealer's lot, they immediately lose a lot of value. But people are still in a rush to find the ones that are going to be rare. And so I've been wondering for a long time when this speculator bubble is going to pop, when people are going to stop caring about these flash in a pan momentary things, and when they're going to stop paying so much for variant covers and stuff. But I've been thinking that for about 5 years now. But so far, there's been no pop in the market, no bubble deflating rapidly. And if there's been any lessening of that, I can't tell. It seems almost like there's more of that now. So maybe there still will be a pop, or maybe there's always an influx of new people who just enjoy that idea that there's a special comic out there. They enjoy the hustle. They enjoy the collecting. I don't think very many people are making a lot of money off of that, except people who are really good at flipping comics right at the right moment before they lose their value again. I think that whole game really appeals to the owner of my comic book shop. He loves figuring out, not that he does this kind of flipping that often, because he can't predict, like what would happen to Batman Damned. But when he does get a hold of a book that he can flip, it kind of excites him a little bit. So maybe this will just continue as a part of the marketplace. The biggest downside to me, even if it doesn't cause a deflation, is when companies try to play to the collectability of things and don't focus enough on story, because that was a big problem in the 90s. After a while, people realized, I'm collecting these comics, but I don't really want to read them because they were written very hastily and a foil cover was put on them and a big gimmick. And of course, that's not true of every comic in the 90s, but it felt that way, like that the writing was going rapidly downhill, particularly at certain companies, and that it was all about the star artist. And then when comics kind of came out of that huge valley, what they came out with was the writer-driven comic, that the remaining people who bought comics had more faith in a comic that had a good writer. If a writer established a name for themselves, a lot of people who are readers would follow that. And this playing to the speculativeness, especially with like the variant covers or other gimmicks, is concerning that way. Rez Reeds said, I can see the argument for some on wanting the direct market to go away, but I enjoy going out into the wild and leafing through a book physically before purchasing. And I do too. And that is something that is going away, even if we buy our books on Amazon or in stock trades. And there's something especially exciting about the floppy comic, the more ephemeral thing that's out this month that you go and you flip through and say, hey, I want to get this. There's a lot of excitement to that, and I hope that doesn't disappear. And she mentioned, the argument of some for wanting the direct market to go away. I guess they want it to go away because it tends to focus on the niche audience, and maybe they think it's holding back comics. Now, I argued in the previous vlog that I think it helps comics evolve more quickly, but I can see the other way of looking at that. Yeah. So Mr. Gretzky says Marvel pads their numbers by giving away free books to shops that order certain amounts. And he's right. There's all kinds of tricks that Marvel plays. And Rob WiseGuy82 responded to Mr. Gretzky and said, yup, very unfortunate. I would say it's also cheating when they make shops buy copies of a book that clearly doesn't sell to get certain variants on books that do sell. And I'd forgotten about that, so I'm glad Rob kind of reminded me of that particular scam. Both of these scams seem used most by Marvel, but other comic companies I don't know if Valiant does it. Dynamite I've seen playing the variant game, and some others. So it's bad enough when a variant isn't cover price and the comic shop has to buy like 10 extra copies that they didn't want of that comic just to have the variant to sell it, or 100 extra comics that they didn't want, and some even 1,000, which means the numbers get padded out that way, but the comic book shop can't really sell all the extra copies. I guess they figured they make enough profit off of the variants that it's worth them doing it, and that's why you get all these new comics in the dollar bins or the 50-cent bins. But then Rob is referring to an even worse thing where they say, and I remember reading about this in a column by a comic shop owner, where they say, and I'm just totally making up the characters, they say, you have to buy 200% of what you ordered last month on the West Coast Avengers if you want to get this special variant on the new Defenders. So they're forcing up the numbers on some other comic they want to promote just for the people who want to sell the variants. To me, the only honest way to do the variants, which I think DC does most of the time, is just cover price variants. So if you like multiple covers of a comic, they'll still make some extra money by selling some extra copies, but they're not gaming the poor dealers and making it look like their comics are selling more copies than they are to their investors or to whoever cares about these numbers by gaming the system this way. So that's really gross. And I really blame Marvel for all of this. But I guess I'll talk more about my theory about Marvel in Sleepy Vlog 78.2. And I have more comments on comic book stores coming up from 64-Page Special, Edward 2962, Samuel Trejo, Special Person, Paulo Costa, and Silver Planet. And then a whole bunch more questions that'll be for part 3. So I hope you'll join me. If you only care about the hauls, I guess you can just watch the beginning of each of these 3 videos because each will have a little bit of a haul. So I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.